So I have an opportunity to be on calls about every 6 weeks with people from all around the world. And these educators are looking to Canada. They're wanting to come and visit us. So coming up in the next month, we'll have visitors from Australia. We have visitors from South Korea coming to look at our system. So they are hearing good things about Canadian education. And I think we do a great job, and we should be proud. And I do think we get our story out to other countries.
Welcome to the Education Matters podcast. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri, and today's guest is a leader whose career in education exemplifies what it means to combine vision with action. Tom D'Amico, Director of Education for the Ottawa Catholic School Board, oversees one of Canada's most innovative and well-respected districts, serving 50,000 students across 89 schools. Tom grew up in Ottawa, the youngest of 4 children in a family of educators. His mother was a grade 1 teacher, and his father, after a teaching career, worked for the Ministry of Education. Yet Tom's path to education, like other leaders in this series, wasn't linear. A lifelong passion for soccer initially led him to pursue a career in professional sports. When an injury shifted his trajectory, Tom discovered new passions, coaching, and eventually teaching. In our conversation, Tom shares how these formative experiences shaped his leadership philosophy, emphasizing collaboration, creativity, and the importance of relationships. He reflects on his district's approach to innovation, from leveraging AI to enhancing teaching and learning, to promoting outdoor education and Indigenous ways of knowing. Tom also discusses the complexity of leading in today's education landscape, balancing academic priorities with the moral imperative of student well-being. We also explore topics like the double-edged sword of AI, the role of equity in digital adoption, and why Canadian education remains a quiet global success story. As always, Tom brings thoughtfulness to each topic, from his commitment to fostering a culture of continuous improvement to his belief that relationships, not technology, are at the heart of great teaching. And now, without further ado, I hope you enjoy my discussion with one of Canada's most forward-thinking education leaders, Tom D'Amico. Hi, Tom. Welcome to the podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
Great to see you, Jason. I'm joining you from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada.
Excellent, Tom. So at this point, I would have given you a proper intro, but do you maybe want to update the audience on anything that I may have missed? What are you currently up to?
Well, I'm privileged to be the Director of Education here in Ottawa. For some of your listeners that may be from other areas, the Director of Education is the equivalent of the CEO or the superintendent in some other districts. We're a publicly funded Catholic school district here in Ottawa, and we are privileged to serve 50,000 students across 89 schools.
Excellent, Tom. Excellent. So one of the real objectives of the podcast is to not only kind of share this, what I view as a really privileged position I've had of the education system really across North America, but also to give the audience a sense of who the people are that are running it. Because I think oftentimes, and maybe this is, something that the Simpsons have done, we have this really narrow view of what a superintendent does and who they are and their background. So can we kind of just kick off? Tell me a little bit about where and when you grew up.
So I grew up in Ottawa. I was the youngest of 4 children. Both my parents were teachers. My mom was actually my grade 1 teacher at St. Augustine School here in Ottawa. My father was a business department head, and then he worked for the Ministry of Education, and then became part of the executive team at the Ottawa Carleton Catholic School Board. So that's where I grew up, and youngest of 4 and family of educators.
Very cool. I didn't realize we had that in common. We can share some more stories of being children of 2 educators. But okay, so both parents were educators. So was it kind of like it was in my household, where it was just understood that education is the thing that family does? Like, my parents never once told me like, hey, you need to go to university. It was just talked about as a natural progression, and it's and something that's very exciting to do, something that's useful for the formation of a responsible adult. Was it similar in your household?
Probably not. No, both of my parents their parents, so my grandparents, none of them had higher than grade three education.
Mm.
So they came to Canada and didn't have education, were blue collar workers. And I think for them, they instilled that need to get a Canadian education in my parents.
Hmm.
But there was definitely no pressure on any of us growing up to go into that area. The last thing I wanted to do was to become a teacher because I saw how hard my parents worked every day,
Yeah.
and none of my siblings went into teaching. But all of us certainly pursued post-secondary education, and we saw the need for continuing studies just to be able to pursue our own passions.
So how did you fall into teaching then?
Well, my passion growing up was soccer, and I wanted to be a professional soccer player. That was my goal as a teenager. That's all I wanted to do. So I went to McMaster and did a master's degree. Sorry, I went to McMaster to play soccer. I did a phys ed degree. And in my
Mm.
last year playing soccer at Mac, I wrecked my knee, completely blew it out, and had no more chance of trying out for any pro team. So I went and did a master's of sport admin. It was a cross MBA and sports program at Ottawa U, and ended up getting hired as the general manager of a pro soccer team in Ottawa. So that was my first career. And as the league was fledgling, I needed a backup. And my real interest was at the time sports. So I went and did a teacher's degree and thought I would be a phys ed teacher.
So was it sports that was the first thing that you really remember, like loving to learn and loving to practice over and over again?
Yeah, it was a combination of playing sports, but it was also the coaching side. I coached at a young age,
Mm.
then that turned into a passion for leadership. So there were a lot of parallels between coaching and leading and working in an organization. So that would definitely be one of my early passions.
Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up in Ottawa at the time that you did? Like, what are some of your earliest memories, maybe in sport with the neighborhood or things like that?
Yeah, certainly it was about being outside. So it was not about being inside on devices or technology that although we did have computers in the late 80s, early 90s in our family. Uh, However, growing up, there were no devices. So we played road hockey. That was a passion whenever we could. We played hide and go seek at night. We were climbing trees. We were riding our bikes around. So that's my memories of being outdoors, being very active, starting to get involved in some organized activities, whether it was at the time, I think Scouts and Cubs and
Mm.
hockey and soccer, baseball. But that would be my growing up for me and my siblings.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the folks that I've interviewed have had a very similar description. But just for our American friends, when we say road hockey, I don't know if they know the kind of road hockey that used to happen, and I do regret that it doesn't happen more often now. Um, that we used to shut down the streets with hockey nets, and I mean, I remember we had, like, up to 15, 20 kids sometimes. Shut down the street with hockey nets, and you would play until you see a car, and then yell "car," move the nets, let the cars pass, and just continue on. I imagine it was similar in Ottawa and all across the country as well.
Yeah, exact same experience. So we would get the nets out and we would play hours and hours until it was too dark to play. And if a car came down the street, you would just move the net and let them go by, and people didn't complain. That was just part of growing up and having kids being outside. But today it's a little bit different. That things have changed quite a bit. That people would not tolerate the road being blocked by hockey nets, and we've heard of complaints when kids are playing basketball outdoors and the nets are too close to the road. So it is a different time for sure.
Yeah, and that's a culture change that I don't think is a good one overall, because it just provides more barriers for kids playing outdoor and doing the kind of physical activity that we know is really, really great for them. Is there anything about your education, your own education, that you would change looking back?
One thing I would look at changing, or maybe not changing, but I reflect on, is when I was a student in grade 12 or grade 13 at the time. Um, I was really interested in business, and
Hmm.
I took calculus, and I needed calculus to get into post-secondary, into business programs. And although I ended up with a good mark, I was a good student. I worked so hard in calculus. I had a tutor every night, and that developed a fear for me that what if I don't succeed and I fail out of college, university because I can't do calculus? So it closed that pathway. I didn't apply to my interest was Queens or Western at the time for their business programs.
Hmm.
And instead, I followed my passion for soccer and I went into phys ed at McMaster, where I didn't have to worry about calculus to go into the phys ed program.
Hmm.
I mean, later on, I ended up doing a master's and took a stats program and, did fine. But that's one thing I would change is looking at what pathways are we closing for students
Hmm.
because of some of our prerequisites in post-secondary and our focus on individual subjects.
Excellent. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. So Tom, if we now kind of turn the page and I ask you to look at your years of experience in the system, what are some of the most inspiring things you've seen?
Yeah, this is my 35th year in education. So things have certainly changed from when I started in 1990 to where we'll be in 2025. I've really been inspired by the talented leaders in education. So there's all kinds of visionaries and people looking at how to support the systems, whether that's your principals, your vice principals, your central staff. I've always believed you don't need a title to be a leader. So we have amazing educators in all different roles throughout the system. I really get inspired when I see the work of some of our early childhood educators, our educational assistants. They work so hard every day, and they're trying to meet the needs of a diverse group of students that they work with. And I'm really inspired by what they do. I'm also inspired in our district by support staff. So I look at our caretakers, our custodians. They take such pride in the cleanliness and the safety, the conditions they're creating. Our administrators, our clinical staff. Everyone is doing their part to make the system run efficiently. And I think a lot of people don't see that. They just see teachers as education, and teachers certainly are extremely important. They're the ones that are closest to the desk of the student. But we need everyone working together from payroll to HR, continuing ed, special education, the technology. So that really inspires me how everyone works together to move the system and to iterate year after year for school improvement. So I'm inspired by so many people across our district.
Yeah, I think that's really wonderfully put, Tom, and I kind of got goosebumps here because, I had an uncle, who's a custodian, and, this is my father's brother. My father's a professor and he's a custodian. And the main difference was, just a much more difficult immigration experience for my uncle as opposed to my dad, who was much older when he came to the country. And he always took great pride in the work he did at the school and being still part of the school system. So I think that's very, very beautifully put on your end. You also are someone that I know, even in your current role, or maybe especially in your current role, has spent a lot of time visiting classrooms. And I know you continue to do that. What are the qualities of a great classroom? What do they sound like, look like, feel like?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. And the key, I think you started there, is what do they sound like? So if I walk by a classroom and I see students sitting in desks, head down, I see either a test taking place or I see a classroom that's all about compliance. Luckily, I don't see a lot of that in the Ottawa Catholic School Board. We base our teaching and learning framework on the work of Dr. Michael Fullen. It's called Deep Learning. So in our classes, we want to see our students working collaboratively. We don't want to see them doing a lot of majority of independent work. We want them to solve real world problems. And we want to develop a sense of a passion for learning so that they know that they can make the world a better place. Whether it's kindergarten to grade 12, it's not about waiting till you graduate. It's about what can you do this year in your grade to whether it's helping a classmate, your school, your local community, global community. So all of that needs us to focus on global competencies like critical thinking and problem solving. So I'll see that in the class. I'll see students, that proximal stretching, they're learning. So they don't have the answers, but they're trying to figure them out. And they're trying to make a difference in the lives of others. So that's definitely different from a quiet classroom where everyone is filling out a worksheet and fact-based rote memory. There is a time for direct instruction and memory, but certainly it's not the majority of the time when students are learning in the Ottawa Catholic School Board.
So the kind of classrooms that you described are quite different, and the pedagogy is quite different than when you or I went to school. What are some things that you would hope or wish that parents would better understand about the system today and about supporting the classroom from the home?
Yeah, it's important that our parents understand that every educator is doing their best. And we want to work with parents, and we do have a great parents association, our parent involvement committee and Catholic School Parents Association. But individually, parents want what's best for their child, and that's what we want as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the challenge is when you get 25 to 30 or more students in a classroom, you can't give that one-to-one personalized attention the entire time. It's just not possible.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to have some rules. And sometimes when you're in a school, if I look at our high schools and teenagers, 2,300 students, you have to have rules and you have to have some structure. And not everyone will agree with those structures, but it allows us to operate the school. At the same time, we know we're trying to meet the diverse needs of every student. So we want parents to know that we want their input to learn how to best serve their child, and we're going to do our best effort to do that. But it may not look identical to what the parent would do if they were working one-on-one with their child. So that's just a compromise in publicly funded education.
Excellent. And I mean, I would add the point too that like one of the things that parents might not be aware of, and this leads me to my next question, is how well we do across the country, particularly in Ontario, of providing a certain base level of education that is very high, actually, right? An equitable kind of playing field where we really give our students, a leg up, so to speak. In your view, what is unique or special about Canadian education as a whole?
Well, we're different than many countries because we don't have a national education system. So every province is unique in setting their own goals and objectives and running education. In many countries, it's the city as well that has a direct involvement. So that sets us a little bit different from other countries. We're very much bilingual. So in Ottawa Catholic, every one of our schools offers French immersion as an option. So that makes us unique as a Canadian system as well. I would think that the fact that we are internationally recognized in Ontario, we need to look at why. And some people think it's because high results on PISA, so the standardized tests. And I'm not a fan of standardized tests. To me, we're reporting a small level or measuring a small level of what's important in education. But people may come because of standardized tests and say, what are you doing to have system scale? And what I'm hoping they will see when they're in our Ontario schools is we have a moral imperative, a dual moral imperative, both student achievement and student well-being. So when you look at what we're doing, our students are engaged, but hopefully they're also happy. They're happy, they're building friendships, they're building social networks. It's not just about, again, rote memorization so you can do really well on a fact-based test. It's about what can you do to help others. So I'm hoping they'll see that when they come and visit Ontario schools. And we do get lots of international visitors coming to Ottawa. We're happy to show them our schools, and we show them an authentic version because we know there's always room to improve. So we'll visit, we'll hear from them, they'll tell us what they like, what they don't like, and we'll involve our principals and educators in that discussion. So I think that sets us apart from some other countries.
Yeah, so Tom, you mentioned this not having a national kind of body of education. However, it's very interesting that like the curricula across the country are awfully similar. Now, there's experimentation happening in like BC that now I think is already spilling over to Alberta, and I believe, like a competency-based curriculum will be more fulsomely adopted here at some point. I know there's a lot of aspects of the Ontario curriculum that are certainly competency based, but although we don't have that overarching system, it is awfully similar. And I think a lot of the things you described about Ontario could be applied to BC, Alberta, or even Nova Scotia, for example. But with that, why don't we have a better story about Canadian education? It's very successful. We do really well, like you said, internationally. We do well on those standardized tests, and I might add, we don't do a lot of standardized tests as a whole. So it's doubly impressive for me. Any inklings as to why we don't have a really strong internal story about how great Canadian education is?
Well, I might push back a little bit on that, Jason, because I think we do.
Mm,
I think internationally we're well recognized. We're part of a deep learning network with, as I mentioned, with Dr. Fullen, and part of that we work with 20 different countries. So I have an opportunity to be on calls, but every 6 weeks with people from
mm,
all around the world. And these educators are looking to Canada. They're wanting to come and visit us. So coming up in the next month, we'll have visitors from Australia. We have visitors from South Korea coming to look at our system. So they are hearing good things about Canadian education. And I can only speak to Ontario because that's where I'm
mm,
located. But
mm,
I'm part of C21, which is a Canadian network of directors and superintendents. So I have an opportunity again every 4 to 6 weeks to talk with directors right across Canada, and we learn from all of the provinces. So we're all proud of what we do, and we can pick up different ideas from different directors and different educators right across the country. I think where it may be the view that, well, Canada's not number one or number two in some of these standardized tests that PISA runs, but
mm,
I'm okay with that personally.
mm,
When I look at the countries that tend to score the highest, if you correlate that with, there is a happiness index as well that's put out globally, they tend to be much lower on the happiness index. Now, it
mm.
doesn't mean Canada has it all solved. When you look at some of the challenges with our youth and mental health, we have a ton of work to do on that side as well. But I think we have a good balance of preparing our students for whether it's post-secondary, world of work, apprenticeship. We've got multiple pathways, and I think we do a great job, and we should be proud. And I do think we get our story out to other countries.
I appreciate that answer, Tom, and I just chuckled there because I thought for a second you were equating drill and kill standardized testing with happiness index, which might
No,
actually have a point. might have
yeah,
a point there. Um, so I appreciate that, and it to me it's interesting. And I think it's very typically Canadian that internally we're more critical of ourselves than externally. So when I say we don't have a great Canadian story, I believe it's internally. Like C21, I know is one of those few organizations where you network across the country, and we're part of another couple organizations that do that kind of stuff as well. But I think to the average Canadian, I don't think they properly understand what a robust education system we have. And so people externally see the Canadians say, hey, this is some really interesting work, and they recognize it. But us, it just might be a Canadian disposition is what I was trying to articulate there.
sure, I agree.
But if we move on to, I think another area that Canada and Ontario in particular are out front and being leaders, it's in AI. Toronto, where I'm located here, is certainly one of the AI hubs of the world. And I see a lot of great work happening across Canada that I believe is leading, let's call it the investigations into AI in education. And I think you are absolutely at the forefront of that. Why are you so committed to investigating AI with your district?
Well, I think it goes back to our board strategic commitments. So we have three main commitments. One is be well, second is be community, and third is be innovative. So if you're going to be an innovative board, you've got to always look at what possibilities are there for improvement. And back in November 2022, when ChatGPT first came out, it was gaining all kinds of interest and attention. And we said, we need to look at this because we don't know anything about it. This is new to us. We don't have expertise in our board. And if we want to be an innovative board, we better look to see, is this something that we could embrace that will help education? We've had a Google ecosystem since 2010 in our district. So we've always looked at how technology can help with student engagement and student achievement. We never wanted every student sitting behind a laptop working independently because that goes against our focus on collaboration and the global competencies. But we needed to look at this. And so last year, or 2 years ago in 2022, the call in our system was very similar to other ones across Canada where educators were saying, this is terrible. We need to block this because everyone's going to use it for cheating. And that's what
Mm.
we had to learn about. So we spent a year last year connecting, networking, learning as much as we could, and providing tools and resources and running pilots. And this year we're full launch of AI across our system. So it has to do with being an innovative board and looking at what might help educators and what might help students.
I've heard at several conferences actually now, AI being compared to the adoption of the calculator. Now, I understand why people are saying that because of the fear that the calculator would inhibit math, students to be able to do mental math and understand math at a fundamental level. But I feel there's a problem with that. How do you believe, or do you believe that AI is fundamentally different than other technologies?
Yeah, and I'm with you. I don't see it as the same as when the calculator came out, not at all. And I've heard that same analogy. To me, it's much more about when the internet came out or when electricity came out. So it's much more than calculator. Calculator was specific to certain students, certain courses, whereas AI is all encompassing. It can have the potential, if we do it right, to impact every student in a school district, every educator in a school district, and not just from the academic side, but from the business or enterprise side as well. So that means we definitely have to approach it differently as a district. Because it permeates right across every staff member, we need to make sure that we're providing professional learning, training to everyone in our district, and that we don't have the answers. So it's changing so rapidly. If I look at when the smartphones or the iPhone came out in particular, and then 10 years later, huge differences from where it started. We're going to see the same thing with AI. So we need to get the tools in the hands of our creative staff and creative students so that they can tell us, here's how it can be used for good. And we're really excited about that.
I love that approach, Tom. I really do. It's like a, investigation as a team into learning about it so you can make the decisions. So do you have, I know for sure you have an administrative team that's looking at it, and how it impacts teaching and learning and pedagogy, and then obviously that will flow into, let's call it teacher professional learning for principals. Do you also have a side, because you mentioned the other side of the day-to-day of running a district? Do you have your teams that are involved in, say, communication, in the day-to-day running of the district, also investigating AI and how it could help on those sides of the work you do?
Yeah, we're in the very early stages. So I mentioned last year was our year of learning. The far majority of our learning was on the academic side. We did run workshops. We brought in a partner. We brought in ALP, Advanced Learning Partnerships. They helped us, and they ran some workshops for everyone in the enterprise. So it was our facilities, our HR, our payroll, finance, continuing ed, clerical staff, our clinicians. So they were introduced to some of the tools. This year, we'll spend more time on that enterprise side because we still need help with that, to say, how is it helping other organizations, let's say integration with onboarding and HR, and what could we be doing with some of these tools on that side? So we're still in the early stages of investigation. Communication is a little bit different. I think they're a little more ahead because it's such a natural fit for generating different areas. One quick example I can share. We produced a video that we sent out to all of our parents about why we're engaging with AI, how we're addressing some of the concerns that we heard and how it might benefit. And then our communications team used AI, an AI tool. They used HeyGen to translate that video with not just translation, but full dubbing with me speaking the language and full transparency saying that this was done by AI. And we translated it and sent it out in me speaking Arabic, speaking fluent French and Spanish, because those are three of the top languages in addition to English. So I'm excited with tools like that will improve communication with our community. And it's only possible because of AI. So I don't have the time, although I'd love to learn multiple and more languages. But AI, the tools that we've purchased, we can translate it into 50 languages. And we're going to get feedback. So we need to hear from our user groups. If you're Arabic speaking and you see the director of education speaking Arabic in a video, is that a good fit? Are you proud of that? Or would you rather just have it narrated in Arabic and not see someone speaking a language that they don't really speak? So we're going to learn about that, and we'll find out, and at least we have the tools that give us that ability now.
Oh, that's an awesome example. When it comes to the teaching and learning side, what have you, and by the way, I want to couch all of this for the listeners, that you are very intentional about talking about this as a process, a learning process. So I'm not going to hold you to anything because we know how quickly AI can change, but what are the areas or how do you believe that AI can genuinely enhance the teaching and learning side of the work you do?
Yeah, I could spend literally an hour on this question, Jason. So I'll try and give a brief summary of some of the areas that we saw last year.
Yeah.
because it is amazing, the potential. And these are just potentials that we know of. As I said earlier, creative educators are going to find all kinds of other uses. So certain lesson planning and learning activities, very easily able to create activities for a class, but also to differentiate it. One of the tools we license is called Brisk, and Brisk sits on top of our Google interface. So an educator and a student can use the Brisk tools this year. So if I'm creating activity for my class and I've spent an hour creating that learning activity, I really don't have the time to now go and have it translated into multiple languages, change all the reading levels, but Brisk can do that very quickly and automatically change the reading level for multiple groups in my class. And it can also create areas that are specific to their interest or abilities. So if I'm teaching a unit on whatever, Canadian history, I can say to it, well, here's 5 students that have no interest in Canadian history, but they love sports. I want you to take this learning activity, modify it so it brings in examples of sports or pop culture that will relate to those students. And that's going to save a lot of time for learning and lesson plans. Assessment and evaluation. We license a tool called Quizzes, and that allows gamification of the assessment process. So it can be formative assessment where the student's going to get immediate feedback right away on the work that they're doing. The students can use it as well. And students told us last year when we had feedback from them, how are you using it? Many were using it for studying. Well, with quizzes, they can create their own quizzes before their actual test in class, whether it's short answer, multiple choice, different languages. So that's another area that we'll be using it, assessment evaluation. Our system leaders, our principals can use it for data analysis. So often it takes a lot of time to wait for someone at the board office to do some analysis of data that they're receiving. We showed our principals last year how they could just take a snapshot of a graph coming out of EQAO, that's the Ontario Standardized Testing Process, and have an analysis done through ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot. Studying and tutoring support are huge. So our students that may not understand the first time the concept that was taught by the educator, and the educator may not have time to get to them during class time. Well, if they're using the tools we have purchased, then they can go back and ask for the same activity, whether they're uploading the teacher's lesson or they're just asking for another way of explaining the concept. Creativity is huge. I have zero artistic talents. Unfortunately, God didn't gift me from that side. But now, because of AI, I generate my own images for everything. So I'm using AI to generate images. I can use tools like Sunos to create music, create poems. So we want to help our students enhance areas that may not be their natural skill set. And there's a whole other area of, reading support, text differentiation, our students with special needs that need additional support. I think about our students who have some challenges with social interaction or executive functioning. Well, they can now use an AI tool to say, here's the situation I'm going into. Give me some tips or hints of how I can best meet with success. They can use that for socialization support. Non-judgmental, but giving them predictable support. I mentioned the communication side in different languages, accessibility side for students with whether it's using text-to-speech or voice typing. Those have already existed. Now they're being enhanced. So it really is amazing the potential that's out there to help with learning and with teaching. But it's all about balance. So having said all of that, and I am excited about what our staff will do, you're not going to walk into our classes and see students sitting behind a device every day. The area of greatest investment we had this year for our school board is in outdoor learning. So Excellent. Way more money has gone into outdoor learning and looking at Indigenous ways of teaching and learning than has gone into AI. But it's going to help in addition with that balanced approach to ways of learning and increasing pedagogical approaches.
Well, I actually think that's a wonderful balance that you're investigating what I would suggest is, probably one of the most important technologies, as you, I think, rightfully pointed to the internet and electricity. I think it'll eventually get there in terms of importance, but then also obviously the need to get students and human beings outside. And I know our Indigenous people in Canada have wonderful ways of teaching how to use the outdoors as a learning place. And I think that's a great approach. As you described all of this, including the outdoor learning emphasis, It seems to me that with AI and all the talk about cell phone bans and cell phones and how impactful those are, our curriculum and our assessment methods are immediately antiquated. How do you see that changing in, say, 5 years? Because I know it takes time to change it. What changes would you like to see?
Yeah, I agree that they need to continue to evolve. I don't think they're going to be antiquated because education as a system is a slow moving beast.
Hmm.
So we're going to have tons of past practices that are going to continue. And that's why you still have to address the cheating and plagiarism concerns that educators have, but then show them how we can address it and move forward with how it can help. So we've suggested to all of our educators this year if they're putting out a course syllabus, that they include, when they're talking about assessment, that all assessments and learning activities are subject to verbal review. And I'm excited about that piece. And here's the reason why. Not because someone thinks the student used AI to cheat, but because they're now going to meet with the student one-on-one, and that student's going to have a chance to use verbal expression to say, here's what I know about this subject or activity, here's what I learned, and here's what I was trying to say in my essay or my written report. We are a text-based heavy industry. So our number one way of assessing students has always been text. So whether you're typing or you're writing, many students, their best way of explaining is verbally and orally in today's generation, and videos. This is going to give them an opportunity to sit with the educator to explain. So a student that may have a mark, whether a mark was 60 or 80, it's not about the mark. It's now finding out from them to really triangulate that data. It's not just the one product that they created, but explaining how they got there and their reasoning. So that excites me about the possible changes in assessment moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, and I think it was Dr. Jordan's here at UFT suggested that one of the great ways we can use AI is to help scale, for example, oral presentations. That it could listen, it could scaffold, it could help teachers do that on mass. Do you see like oral examinations coming back? Because I know they used to be a huge part of how you would be assessed.
I think they're going to continue to evolve, so we will see more of that. But I'm really hoping, whether it's you're getting into some of the summative evaluation where we come up with a final mark for students, I'm hoping we see more focus on the process and not just that summative final task.
Yeah.
And that's a bigger change, and that's getting more into education reform and focusing on competencies as opposed to just putting out a final product. But the example you gave, what's exciting to me is finding the AI tools that will allow the student to practice. So I can record myself, and now I can get feedback from AI to say, here's areas that you didn't pause enough, or areas that you moved in the wrong direction, or you forgot about this other argument side. That's where AI is going to help the students in the end have a much better final product, because they're getting that feedback during their practice sessions, not just at the end when it's over. Our report card data is our tombstone data. It's too late. It's over. I want the students to learn and get that passion for learning and improving, and AI tools that do assessment can help our students in that way.
I love that. And I am going to take that tombstone data. It is a very good way of looking at it. Is kind of too late to do anything with. So Tom, there's been a lot made, especially since COVID, of the digital divide and how inequities, especially during and after COVID, have hit probably more of the population than anyone would like. I can see AI both exacerbating that as well as helping it. What's your view on that?
Yeah, when we started learning about AI and we looked at AI, our number one reason, or our why do we need to do this, was about equity. So that was our driving force to spend that year learning. It was, if we don't do something, we're going to increase the digital divide. We learned from the pandemic that there were families that did not have devices, did not have internet connectivity. So now seeing the potential of AI and what the tools can do, I don't want to see a system where only the well-to-do kids in our school or families who have the resources, if we were to ban everything, students would still use it. They would go home, they would get paid subscriptions to things where other students would not have access at all. So one of the reasons we've gone and to address that digital divide is we have invested, we have prioritized funds to make sure that every student has access to AI tools at school, which they can use for free. This teacher still or educator will still tell them when they can use it, but those tools are there. And when they go home, if they have access to a device, they can still access those tools. So that equity is so important that we're not increasing the digital divide. AI definitely has the potential to make things worse or make things better. And we want to be on the side of making things better when it comes to equity.
Like, let's say now you're using AI to level the playing field, right? So now a kid that wouldn't have access to a tutor can now have access to a tutor, and like you're suggesting, get feedback on presentations, and heck, even help keep them organized and scheduled, and all those kind of wonderful things that we know students that don't have parents around that are working often usually get. So it could provide a big benefit. But what kind of skills do you hope that those kind of students really develop in this kind of new AI-driven world?
Yeah, there's studies that are showing that about 95% of all organizations will be using AI by the end of 2025. So that's now, it's right around the corner. So our students need to be comfortable using AI tools. So that's the first skill, is how do you use some of these tools? Age appropriate. We don't want our kids in grade 1 using ChatGPT. They're not 13. So we have to look at that age appropriateness, but we want to teach them the skills. With the skills, our number one focus in terms of global competencies is critical thinking. So they need to know and understand what hallucinations are, what deep fakes are, and recognize that they can't trust what they're seeing or hearing on YouTube, on social media. They need to think critically, find multiple sources, because now with the AI tools, anyone can replicate someone else speaking, someone saying something that they never did. We're seeing this right now in the US election. So our students have to learn AI literacy. And starting this year, we've already started in September, every one of our students will be getting through our Samaritans on the Digital Road program, AI literacy lessons that are age appropriate in every grade, every class. So that's an important skill that I think every educator needs to teach students. Our students will be at a disadvantage if they don't learn some of the skills and tools. So I'll give an example of a student in grade 12 that's applying, or grade 11 that's applying for a summer job. So traditional method, you type up your cover letter, you send it in, you say that I worked at this fast food place and this is my experience, or I ran a summer camp, and you hope you get an interview. The students that know how to use AI tools, they're going to run their cover letter through an AI tool with the job description. It's going to come back to them to say, here's the ways that you can improve your cover letter. Then they're going to use that, make the changes. They're going to do a mock interview with AI. They have a much better chance of getting hired for the summer than that student that doesn't have those skills. So it's not just about what we're doing in our academics. It's about life for every one of our students.
That's excellent, Tom. Thank you. So the flip side to AI and to using AI, and I've seen this in my everyday practice, is that now, although it approximates human intelligence, it's not obviously replacing a human. And this is one of the early things I heard, that teachers would be anxious that, AIs and Silicon Valley would want to replace teachers to save costs and stuff, which to me, on face value, is ridiculous. But what are the most human elements to teaching that will never be replaced by AI? And a follow-up to that is, how do we enhance those things? How do we be more aware of them as a society, as a district, as a group of leaders in education?
Yeah, the relationships are the number one thing in a classroom. When you're going to look at helping a student to improve and a student to learn, there has to be a positive relationship for almost all students. And you're not going to have that same level of relationship. There will be some with AI, but you don't have the empathy, you don't have the understanding, you don't have the skill sets that an educator has to look at what's happening in that student's life that's impacting their way of learning today. There is a UK private school that has just started this year that is not using any educators. It's completely AI based, and I think that's awful. I think that's not what our students need. I don't want to see students sitting behind a computer screen 6 to 7 hours a day learning from a computer bot. They need that relationship piece with an educator. For the far majority, there'll be some exceptions. But we looked at our number one principle was to our AI guiding principles was to prioritize the humane and ethical use of technology. And we've always been about using technology for good and the humane use, because we know it can be used for bad things, and it is being used for bad things. So we want to teach our students that ethical side. We created a toolkit of multiple resources for our teachers, all of our staff. And one of the toolkits looks at how do you assess the output. And when you're looking at the output, that's the human piece coming in. You don't just take what AI has generated and assume it's good and it's not biased. You take that output and you analyze it before you use it. You look to see, are there inherent biases? Or is it continuing to add to other stereotypes? Are the going to be body images issues because of the graphics it has created? So that's that human part. We want to add the human in that humane use of technology. And that's what a gifted educator will bring to the table, bring to the classroom. They're not just using technology to not involve the educator. They're enhancing what the educator already brings to the classroom.
Okay, so this is more just geeking out on AI as opposed to, your role as superintendent. So I won't hold you to this, but what's your gut tell you about the potential of an AGI? So that would be an artificial general intelligence, which for listeners, if they're not familiar with this, the idea would be, like this is having truly Einstein level, thought in your pocket. And some folks forecast with an artificial general intelligence, the machines would be capable of a Nobel Prize winning discovery a day or an hour or something like that. Any thoughts in your reading and just musings about, the potential of that? Because to me, that's where you get into both, some utopian possibilities, but also some real scary possibilities as well.
Yeah, it's got to be about balance. So we are expecting the next version of ChatGPT. I think it will probably be called Strawberry. That's the rumors. 100 times more powerful, and it should be out this year. So what will that mean? What will it look like? It's not going to be AGI yet, but it's, we're looking at those systems being extremely powerful. But the analogy I would use is when I look at a student in grade 12, and because I was a high school principal and high school teacher, that's when I'm most comfortable sharing personal experiences. I can have a student that had a 99% in physics or 100% in physics, but not once ever helped another student, was engaged in the school, was involved in the community, but they were brilliant at physics. And there's a role for that student. They're going to go on and they will go to a university and they will hopefully do some discoveries. But then I can take the student who had a mark in the 80s to 90s in physics and helped other students that were involved, that were impacting their community. So to me, personally, I would much rather have a larger group in that 80 to 90% that are helping everyone else and looking to solve world problems collaboratively. You still need those geniuses, and they are important to our society to move forward, but they're going to be the anomalies. And if generative, as we move to different types of AI, those tools in the hands of those creative people that want to work with others, they're the ones that are going to make the big difference. So I can have the best invention in the world, but if I can't market it, I can't work with others, it's going to be a problem. And same thing, if I create the cure for cancer, I'm certainly hoping it's me that's going to share it with the world and not me that's just going to try and make myself a multi-billionaire. So we're trying to create graduates that will flourish and help others.
Yeah, and I think this is implicit in your answer, but just to put a fine point on it, I also think that the graduates that we turn out are going to have a true ethical concern around these technologies, because you can definitely see how an asymmetry, your example is a perfect one, right? A company develops an AI that figures out cancer and then just hoards it and isn't something that is for the general public, right? Or it's very expensive, so it's only for the wealthy. Okay, Tom, with that, if you look forward to the future of education, say, a nice 50 years out, because that seems like, you and I are not going to be here in 50 years, but let's say 50 years out, what does the Canadian education system look like?
It's probably not possible for me to know what it's going to look like 50 years, but I hope that what I just said is true, that 50 years from now, it doesn't look what it looks like today, because today's education isn't that different from 50 years prior. So some of the structural things that I hope are gone, the elimination of grade levels, where we're organizing students based on birth year, the traditional school year, subjects taught in isolation, trying to focus on grades to more of a change to competency. So I think a lot of those things can happen in much shorter time period. We won't have to wait 50 years. But who knows what the technology advancements will be in 50 years and how it will impact education. I'm hopeful that it'll still exist, that you have physical locations where people gather, because that's that human relationship side, the networking, the building, the social side of education that's so important. And we don't have a system where everyone just stays home on their own and learns because they have the best AI tutor and the AI resources, that they don't need to go to a physical location. We also run virtual schools, and there's a place for virtual schools, and it's a 1% to 2% of all of our students really benefit from virtual schools. So you want to run those. And we have students that are doing e-learning, and a small portion benefit from the e-learning. But the far majority still need that social interaction, that going to school because you're excited to see friends, to develop new friendships. And it is different in person than online. So that humane piece, I hope we don't lose the human interaction 50 years from now because of the advancements in technology.
Excellent, Tom. Excellent. So the penultimate question here, and maybe it was implicit in that answer, but I'll let you address this directly. If you had a magic wand and you can do anything, what would you do today?
Yeah, if I could do anything, I would make sure that every classroom educator, every administrator, every student had the support that they need to meet with success. So that comes down to resource allocation. It would also mean more flexible days, more flexible school scheduling for students. Whatever device the student needs, they would have. They would be free internet access for everyone at home. We would have increase in pay for all members of the education sector right around the world. That would make it a real desirable profession that pays extremely well, to recognize the impact they're having on future generations. That we would have more support staff for our things, whether it's early childhood educators or educational assistants, that we would have the access and the right pay to support everyone. The reality is we don't have a magic wand. We have budget constraints.
Right.
So that's the reality we deal with in the education sector every single day, which makes it a challenge. But money's not the only solution, but doubling the investments in education would have a significant impact on the experience of every student and on our staff.
Well, Tom, let me say this. Out of, I think you're the 15th person I've interviewed. Right now, you're getting the magic wand, if I could give you one, because you're the first one that really had that in-depth answers to like double down on all of it. We know what we need to be successful. I just read a report about world education using all kinds of data, and it clearly shows more investments in education, the kind that you're talking about, create better long-term GDP. Like it's an unbroken line to that kind of success. So I hope those listening truly understand that every investment you make in education gets paid back several times over. So with that, Tom, last question for you. What podcast, book, movie, album would you recommend to the listener?
I guess I'll share my most recent books. I read a lot. That's something I really enjoy. It's one way I learn, and I actually do prefer reading a book. I do have Audible as well, and I listen to some podcasts, but reading a book to me is part of my relaxation and my stress relief. So the most recent books I've read over the summer, if you want one for AI, it was An Educator's Guide to AI in the Classroom. It's by Abigail McCaig. It really gives good practical advice, both for administrators, also for educators. There's many others. I've read lots of AI books, so there's many, but that was the most recent one I've read. I really love reading about and learning about leadership. So I would say the 2 or 3 that I read this summer, The Secret of Culture Change, How to Build Authentic Stories and Transform Your Organization. That's by Jay Barney. There's a group of authors. And it really talks about, when you're looking at leadership and change, you need to start with, how do you change culture? Because you're going to be gone at some point. And so that everything doesn't get reversed, you want the culture to be changed. the Smart Leadership, Joe Owen, Ultimate Handbook for Great Leaders. Lots of nice quick tidbits, and that's the book I used this year for our system when I met with our central leaders and principals, just talking about here's some advice, things that we can do, because everyone's working too hard. Everyone doesn't have the time. So we need to be looking at how can we have smart leadership. And then a book that I'll be sharing with our district later on with our system leaders is Messy Leadership by Gallagher and Connor. And Messy Leadership, it's an acronym, but it really looks at leadership's not easy, and it is messy, and there's things we can do to continually have improvement. So those would be 3 books I would say that I would recommend on leadership.
Excellent. Thank you. Tom D'Amico, thank you for all the work that you do, and thank you for joining the Education Matters podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jason, for having a chance to talk with you. I really enjoyed it, and let's hope that right across Canada we continue to see improvements, and AI is part of that.
This podcast is recorded on the Territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Until next time.